Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. This week, we are making a 7 and 7 with pizza from Saturday Night Fever. If you haven't seen Saturday Night Fever, it's a 1977 dance drama film directed by John Badham, based on a 1976 New York Magazine article titled Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night, and is a film which, despite its rather dark, lurid, and taboo subject matter, has been parodied and recreated time and time again. Saturday Night Fever follows Tony Manero, a teenage Brooklynite who spends his days working at his local paint store, getting in some heated arguments with his family,
we just washed the hair,
and noshing on double-decker pizza slices from real-life Brooklyn pizzeria Lenny's Pizza, served up by John Travolta's real-life sister. But come Saturday night, Tony is at his local discotheque 2001 Odyssey, where he's tearing it up on the dance floor, showing off his sweet disco moves, and always ordering his favorite cocktail.
Oh, give me 7-7. 7-7.
7-7.
You got a 7-7 for me.
But before we make our 7 and 7, we're first going to make a pizza sauce for our pizza, which starts with one 28-ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes, followed by 4 cloves of garlic that have been chopped and sauteed in 2 tablespoons of olive oil, in addition to 2 teaspoons each of chopped basil and oregano, followed by a teaspoon of Italian sea salt, as well as a teaspoon of freshly cracked pepper. And I added an optional half a teaspoon of crushed red chilies. Then we will blend it all together and give it a quick taste and refrigerate it until we're ready to make our pizza. Now it's time to make our pizza dough, which, similarly to our donut episode you can watch here, actually took me multiple attempts. And with my first attempt, I hadn't really nailed down a dough recipe that I liked and actually combined several different recipes I found. And unlike the rest of my doughs, I mixed and kneaded this one totally by hand. I also only proofed this dough for one night in the fridge before making it, which, as we'll come to find, probably isn't a long enough proof. Similarly, I had yet to figure out the proper crust making technique, nor did I weigh out any of my separate dough balls, which resulted in a way too thick and doughy and a generally awful looking pizza, which surprisingly still actually tasted good. On my second dough, I finally figured out a recipe I liked, which, like my sauce, comes courtesy of Kevin over at the Pizza Channel, whose New York style pizza video you can check out here, and I will also link his channel below. This time I also made sure to weigh out my individual dough balls, which I do find to be a crucial step in the process, but I still only did a 24-hour proof, and I still hadn't perfected my crust making technique, resulting in yet another pizza that was far too thick and not that crispy, floppy, New York style look that I was going for. That said, I still managed to eat the whole thing. My third dough I prepped the exact same way, except this time I proofed the dough for a full 48 hours, which I ultimately felt really helped in getting the crust consistency right. Another positive with my third dough is that I finally had gotten my crust making technique down, which we'll talk more about shortly, and was able to achieve a thinner, more classic style New York look. However, I found that, like with my other attempts, I was getting not crispy enough a crust and too burnt of cheese on top. Ultimately, I discovered this was because I was using the wrong type of cheese. But again, we'll talk more about that later. But I tried to circumvent this problem by doing a non-traditional method of par baking my crust. But the problem with par baking your pizza crust is that the crust will develop these annoying air bubbles which I had to deflate. And while my crust was more done on the bottom and the cheese didn't burn this go around, the final product was too thick and didn't have the foldability that we're looking for in New York style pizza. So, crushed and disappointed, I knew at this point I had to start over yet again. So here's how I made the final dough, which starts in a big bowl, to which we'll add 1.5 cups of water, followed by 2 teaspoons of sea salt, in addition to 1 teaspoon of sugar, as well as a half a teaspoon of garlic powder, followed by 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and 1 packet of active dry yeast, which comes out to 7 grams or around 2¼ teaspoons. Then we want to gently mix this together before adding our 2 types of flour. The first of which is 1 cup of 00 flour, which is pretty much the gold standard for pasta and pizza dough. That 1 cup is about 120 grams for the baking purists out there. Then we'll add 2½ cups of bread flour, or 300 grams if you want to do it by weight. Now you could mix this dough by hand, but I used a hand mixer with a dough hook attachment to make this process a little easier. So mix your dough until it's all seamlessly incorporated, scraping down the sides of the bowl to ensure that you get all of that flour mixed in. And And once that dough is all mixed together, we are then going to flour our work surface, and then we are going to knead that dough for around 10 minutes until you have created a nice smooth dough ball. Unlike my previous attempts at making dough, both in this episode and our donut episode, I was actually able to knead this one myself without the help of my expert kneader and lovely fiance Bailey. And once your dough is able to pass a window pane test, we want to form it into a dough ball. Then, once your dough has become a nice smooth dough ball, we want to put a teaspoon of olive oil into a bowl, brushing the oil along the sides to make sure it covers the entire bowl. Then you want to place your dough into that bowl and take another teaspoon of olive oil, which we will then brush over the top of the dough ball. Next, we're going to cover this dough with a towel and allow it to rise at room temperature for an hour to an hour and a half. And when the dough has risen at room temp, we'll then pop out any air bubbles that may have formed, and then cover and transfer this dough into the fridge where we'll allow it to proof for 24 hours. And once your dough has proofed for its first 24 hours, we'll remove it from the fridge and then deflate the dough using your fist like so. Next, we're gonna remove the dough from the bowl and form it back into a big dough ball. And you're gonna wanna weigh out that dough ball. This particular dough came out to be exactly 2 pounds, or 32 ounces. So using a bench scraper, I then cut and divided that dough into 3 separate dough balls, 2 12-ounce dough balls and 1 smaller 8-ounce dough ball. You're gonna wanna make sure you form each piece of dough into a nice seamless dough ball, pinching the back together almost like you're making a bao bun. For this next round of proofing, we want to use 3 separate bowls to proof each dough ball, each of which you similarly want to line with olive oil, and then place our dough balls into each container. We'll then brush a little bit more olive oil on top of each, and then you want to cover each of these separate dough balls and proof them one final time in the fridge for another 24 hours. And while our dough's proof in the fridge for another 24 hours, let's discuss the 2 tools you'll need to make pizza at home. The first of which is a pizza stone, which we'll put the pizza on to cook in the oven. As you can see throughout the process of making this video, my stone got a lot of wear and color from use. And when you cook your pizza, you're gonna wanna make sure your stone is on the bottom rack of the oven. You additionally wanna make sure you preheat the stone along with your oven so the stone doesn't crack. The other tool you'll need is a pizza peel, which you're going to use to slide the pizza in and out of the oven. They also make metal pizza peel specifically for taking the pizza out of the oven, but a wooden one will work just fine for both steps. And after another 24 hours, we'll remove the dough balls from the fridge and allow them to come to room temperature. And before we do, we want to brush a little bit more olive oil onto the tops of each in order to ensure our crust gets nice and crispy. I actually ended up removing each dough ball from the bowls they were in to ensure they come to room temperature. Allowing the dough to fully come to room temp is crucial so you don't undercook your dough and overcook your toppings. And while the dough comes to room temperature, let's talk about cheese. The cheese you want to use for this type of pizza is a full-fat, low-moisture mozzarella like this Galbani brand, which, unlike the cheese I used for my first few attempts, this Polio mozzarella that actually needed to be frozen in order to shred properly and resulted in a final product with bubbly burnt cheese, Galbani's low-moisture, full-fat mozzarella actually shreds better when not frozen because, as you can see here, when I tried to shred it from a frozen state, I ended up cutting off a large chunk of my fingernail. So I decided it was best to wait until the cheese came to room temp before I finished shredding it. And in the meantime, you want to preheat your oven to 550 degrees for at least 45 minutes to ensure that the bottom of your crust gets nice and crispy. And once your dough is completely to room temp, it's ready to be formed into a pizza. So first, cover your work surface with a thin layer of flour, and then sprinkle a little more of that flour on top of your dough, and then we're gonna lay that dough out onto our work surface. But you should also probably dip that dough into some flour like I had done on my previous attempts here. At any rate, once your dough is on the surface, we will begin stretching it out using the flat parts of your fingers like so, popping out any air bubbles in the dough that you may encounter along the way. Your goal here is to stretch and flatten the dough as evenly and thinly as possible, whilst making sure to avoid the outer edge, which you want to rise and become your crust. I recommend being as patient and meticulous as possible with this step, as this is really where you make or quite literally break your pizza. And once you have formed a nice even crust, we then want to prep our pizza peel by first covering it with a thin layer of flour, followed by a layer of cornmeal or semolina, which will help ensure that the pizza doesn't stick to the peel and allow it to easily slide off into the oven. Now, using your knuckles, you want to further stretch out your dough before placing it on your peel by carefully rotating it with your fists, making sure you don't rip any holes in it. You can actually better see this technique in my previous attempts here. Then we'll gently place the dough onto the peel and carefully stretch it back out into a circle. And once you have formed your nice thin crust, it is time to sauce your pizza. So using a ladle, we'll take a spoonful of sauce and place it in the middle of the pizza. Then we will use the back of the ladle to spread the sauce evenly outward, adding a little bit of sauce here and there if need be. You don't want to use too much sauce as it will cause your pizza to be soggy. You also want to make sure your sauce doesn't go all the way to the outer rim to ensure that you keep a nice clean crust. And once you feel like you have a nice even layer of sauce, it's time to put on your cheese. Like with the sauce, you don't want to use too much cheese, and you want to make sure you create a nice even layer. I also like my New York style pizza to maintain an outer rim of sauce between the cheese and the crust. So fill in all the empty gaps with your full fat mozzarella. And once you have a nice layer of cheese, it's time to put this pizza in the oven. So we'll transfer this pizza into our oven at 550 degrees onto the stone on the bottom rack. And after a little over 6 minutes in the oven, our pizza was looking pretty fantastic.
Oh my God!
Although this wasn't the most perfectly circular pie I had made, I decided to go with it for the final product because I'd spent 4 weeks on this and I had finally achieved the crispy crust as well as that perfectly melted cheese I was looking for. Now it's time to make our 7 and 7. Similar to one of the cocktails we made last time on the show, a 7 and 7 is actually a type of whiskey highball, only with whiskey spelled the American way, and is a combination of Seagram 7 whiskey and 7-Up. A 7 and 7. Tony Manero also isn't the only famous fictional character to order a 7 and 7. The drink has made many appearances in movies and TV throughout the years.
7-7.
Can I have a 7 and 7?
Listen, have a 7-7. It's a good proposal.
Typically, a 7 and 7 would be served in a highball glass, but for today's episode, I bought this cool vintage 7 and 7 mug that had a real dated 70s vibe to it. Now we're gonna fill that 7 and 7 mug 3/4 of the way full with ice, followed by 2 ounces of our Seagram 7 whiskey, and then we're just gonna top it off with some 7-Up, and finally garnish with a lemon wheel. Now all that's left to do is cut into this pizza, for which I'm using a classic pizza cutter, and I wanted to cut off some pretty large slices in order to replicate that traditional New York style look. And we're gonna serve those slices on a white paper plate, and as you can see, we finally achieved that classic New York flop that I had long sought after. But of course, we need 2 slices stacked on top of each other, just like Tony Manero ate. And at long last, your 7 and 7 with pizza is finally done. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. So we'll start with a bite of our double-decker pizza slices, which of course, if you're eating New York style pizza, you have to fold. And I gotta say, I'm not tooting my own horn, but that is truly some of the best pizza I have ever had. And without the help of Kevin over at the Pizza Channel, I wouldn't have been able to achieve such a feat. So please, again, check out his channel here. The crust is perfectly crispy, the sauce is tangy and full of flavor, and that low moisture, full fat mozz adds that perfect level of grease, gooiness, and salinity that you're looking for in a New York style pie. But how does our pizza pair with the 7 and 7? Well, the 7 and 7 is really a perfect pairing for pizza because it evokes a certain sense of nostalgia. It's reminiscent of the many times in my own life where I've ordered a pizza alongside a 2-liter of soda pop. And the Seagram 7 is a light and inoffensive enough whiskey where you're really mostly getting that sweetness of the 7-Up, which pairs beautifully with the saltiness from our pizza, hence why these two are so perfect together. Whoa, what happened to the lights? And who changed the music? What the heck is going on here? Oh man, this music really makes me feel like dancing. But wait, gotta finish this review. So, without a doubt, this radical pairing right here is most definitely worthy of 2 groovy thumbs up. If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any video suggestions in the comments below. Full recipes will be included in a link in the video description. Follow us on all forms of social media at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we make a pairing from Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And as always, thank you for watching.